The interstellar collective had maintained records for approximately 14,000 cycles, and in that time one truth had emerged as absolute as the laws of thermodynamics. Desert planets devoured everything: life, hope, ambition, common sense. The sand consumed it all, with the patient enthusiasm of entropy itself. Karak 7 exemplified this universal principle beautifully. Two suns beat down on endless ochre dunes with the focused malice of cosmic magnifying glasses. Surface temperatures regularly kissed 200 degrees in whatever measurement system you preferred. They were all terrible. The atmosphere, technically breathable, carried enough particulate matter to sandblast your respiratory system into an early retirement. Radiation levels hovered at inadvisable, trending toward, "Are you suicidal?" And the water? Well, the water had departed for greener pastures roughly 3 million years ago and hadn't bothered leaving a forwarding address. The Zenthari Empire had tried first. Naturally. They tried everything first, on account of having the largest military and the smallest collective sense of self-preservation. They'd established a research outpost on Karak 7 approximately 200 cycles back, staffed it with their finest environmental engineers, and proceeded to watch those engineers slowly lose their minds as every moisture reclamation system failed, every cooling unit burned out, and every botanical experiment turned into expensive kindling. The Zenthari abandoned the outpost after 16 months. They left behind a monument, not intentionally, but the half-buried research station served as an excellent gravestone for ambition. The Qixari Confederacy had attempted next, bringing their famous adaptive biotechnology, and departing 8 months later with significant losses to heatstroke and what their medical reports euphemistically called environmental psychological distress. Translation: the desert had driven them collectively bonkers. Even the Threshold Collective, those silicon-based wonders who thought in mathematical proofs and communicated in frequency modulations, had taken one look at Karak 7's resource deficit and calculated the effort-to-benefit ratio as laughably negative. So when the human colony ship entered Karak 7's orbit and began running surface scans, the dozen or so alien observation stations scattered throughout the system collectively wondered if they were witnessing a mass suicide pact or just standard human confusion. "They're surveying the surface," Observer Kanthal reported to his Zenthari superiors, his secondary eyes blinking in confusion. "Extensively. Perhaps their navigation systems malfunctioned," his commander suggested hopefully. "No, sir. They're broadcasting excited chatter about optimal conditions and reminds me of home." A long pause followed. "Optimal for what?" "Dying." The human ship, designated the Perseverance because humans apparently named their vessels after character traits they found aspirational rather than actual capabilities, spent 3 full days in orbit. Alien observers monitored their communications with the fascination typically reserved for impending disasters. "The southern continent has excellent solar exposure," someone named Marcus Webb announced, his voice crackling through the monitoring systems. "Amara, what's your read on the substrate composition?" "Gorgeous, actually." This from Dr. Amara Okonkwo, whose definition of gorgeous apparently differed significantly from the rest of the galaxies. "High mineral content, good drainage potential. We'll need amendments, obviously. But the base material is workable." "Chen, water prospects." "Oh, you're going to love this." Chen Zhao sounded genuinely delighted, which seemed medically concerning. "I'm seeing geological formations consistent with aquifer systems. Deep, maybe 60 to 100 meters, but they're there. The topology suggests ancient river systems, which means, which means the water didn't leave, it just went underground. Webb finished. Outstanding. Yuki, can we land near Sector 7 Alpha? Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka responded with what sounded like barely contained glee. We can land anywhere you want, Chief. I'm plotting approach vectors now. The alien observers exchanged transmissions filled with confusion and concern. They know it's a desert, correct? The Qixari monitor inquired. Their scanners appear functional, confirmed the threshold observer. Then they're aware it will kill them. One would assume that's common knowledge, yes. The Perseverance landed 3 days later in a blast of retro thrusters and optimism. The landing site, helpfully designated New Flagstaff by the humans, sat in a basin surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided precisely zero shelter from the dual-sun hellscape above. 217 humans disembarked wearing cooling suits and expressions of determined enthusiasm. Within 6 hours they'd begun digging. Not carefully, not tentatively. They attacked the desert floor with drilling equipment, excavation machinery, and what appeared to be personal vendettas against the ground itself. 30 dig sites went operational simultaneously, each boring downward with the patient fury of species that had apparently done this before. What are they doing? Cole asked, now watching full-time because his superiors had decided this qualified as important intelligence gathering. Unclear, his analyst replied. They appear to be making holes. To what end? Unknown. They're going quite deep, though. 60 meters at Site 1, 70 at Site 4. Perhaps they're burying themselves, a ritual suicide practice. But the humans didn't bury themselves. They dug for 6 weeks straight, working in shifts, rotating crews, operating around both suns' schedules with the kind of systematic efficiency usually reserved for military campaigns. The alien observers watched, fascinated, as hole after hole punched downward into Carrack 7's crust. Then Site 1 struck water. The celebration could be heard from orbit. Humans emerged from their environmental shelters and actually congregated around the drill site despite surface temperatures that would liquefy most organic life. They cheered. They embraced. Someone broke out musical instruments, actual physical instruments, hauled across light years for apparently this exact moment. They found water, Kolthar reported, his voice flat with disbelief. Where? 68 meters down. They're pumping it up now. That's not possible. We scanned for water. Extensively. For months. Yes, sir. They found it in 6 weeks. A long pause. Are they lucky or are we incompetent? I'm genuinely unsure, sir. The humans weren't finished with their holes, though. They struck water at 9 more sites over the following month, establishing what Chen Zhao cheerfully called a distributed aquifer access network. They installed pumps, laid pipeline, constructed storage tanks, and built the whole system with the casual competence of species that had done this thousands of times, which, as it turned out, they had. But water was only step 1, and the humans approached step 2 with equally alarming enthusiasm: shade. The architecture that emerged from New Flagstaff looked nothing like the Zenthari's failed outpost, or the Qixari's melted biodomes. The humans built low, spreading their structures horizontally rather than vertically. They constructed shade networks, vast canopies of reflective material stretched between buildings, creating interconnected cool zones that turned the settlement into something resembling a mechanical oasis. They oriented everything to maximize airflow, dug partially underground for thermal mass, and painted every surface in colors that made the alien observers' optical senses hurt. It's hideous, Qixari observed. It's functional, his analyst corrected. Internal temperatures are holding at 25 degrees Celsius. That's impossible. And yet, the humans called it passive cooling, explaining the concept to increasingly bewildered alien observers as though it were obvious. Heat rises, cool air sinks, shade reduces solar gain, thermal mass stabilizes temperature fluctuations. Basic physics, really, applied with the kind of practical engineering that suggested humans had been thumbing their noses at hostile environments for quite some time. Then came the gardens, and that's when the galaxy started paying serious attention. Dr. Amara Okonkwo approached agriculture the way generals approached warfare, with detailed planning, overwhelming force, and absolute confidence in victory. She started with soil amendments, mixing the mineral-rich Karak substrate with organic materials the humans had brought specifically for this purpose. The alien observers watched in horror as the humans established what they cheerfully termed composting operations, deliberate decomposition of organic waste to create nutrients. "They're rotting things on purpose," Qixari reported, his voice strained. "For what purpose? To put the rot into the ground, to make things grow. That's disturbing. Sir, it's working." The first greenhouse went operational in month 4, a transparent dome filled with carefully controlled atmosphere, and the kind of cautious optimism that suggested the humans weren't entirely certain this would work either. Dr. Okonkwo planted seeds from Earth, hardy desert species that her team had pre-adapted for Karak 7's unique conditions. Agave, mesquite, various cacti, vegetables that apparently thrived in conditions most species would categorize as hostile. The first sprouts emerged 2 weeks later. The Zenthari delegation arrived in month 5, ostensibly to check on the human colonization attempt, but actually to figure out what in the name of thermodynamics was happening. Ambassador Vrek and his team materialized in New Flagstaff's central plaza, now shaded, cooled, and decorated with small potted plants, with the air of academics visiting a crime scene. Marcus Webb met them wearing casual work clothes and a smile that suggested he'd been expecting this visit. Ambassador Webb said pleasantly, "Welcome to New Flagstaff. Can I offer you some water? We have plenty." Vrek's translator unit struggled with the casualness of that statement. "You have plenty of water? Here? Oh sure. Wells are producing about 2,000 liters per hour collectively. More than we need, honestly. We're looking into expanding the agricultural operations." "How?" Webb blinked. "How are we producing water, or how are we expanding? How are you alive?" "Ah, well, water's underground. You just have to know where to dig. Shade keeps things cool. We brought our own topsoil cultures. Pretty standard terraforming stuff, really. Would you like a tour?" The tour lasted 4 hours and left the Zenthari delegation in a state of philosophical crisis. Webb and Dr. Okonkwo walked them through the water network, explaining aquifer geology and pump mechanics. They demonstrated passive cooling systems, showing how simple physics could overcome extreme heat. They toured the greenhouses, where vegetables grew in neat rows, and the air smelled of growth rather than sterility. But the heat, Vrek protested weakly. The radiation, the complete absence of surface water. "Oh, those are challenges." "Definitely," Dr. Okonkwo agreed. "But they're solvable challenges. You know what we call this back on Earth?" She gestured at the harsh landscape beyond the settlement. "Arizona." "Well, Arizona with an extra sun and slightly worse UV, but basically Arizona." "What's Arizona?" "A desert on Earth. Humans have lived there for thousands of years." "Why?" Dr. Okonkwo considered this. "It's nice. Dry heat is easier to manage than humidity, honestly. Plus, desert landscapes have a certain aesthetic appeal. The translator unit made a sound like a small electronic stroke. 6 months into the colonization, New Flagstaff had expanded to accommodate 500 humans, with more arriving monthly. The gardens had grown from experimental greenhouses to actual agricultural zones producing food. Trees, actual earth trees adapted for extreme conditions, had been planted in shaded areas and were impossibly thriving. The water network had expanded to include decorative features because apparently humans needed aesthetic water flow for morale purposes. The galactic scientific community, forced to confront the reality of successful human desert colonization, began requesting data. How had the humans located subsurface water? What cooling technologies were they employing? Could their agricultural methods be replicated? Other species attempted replication with results ranging from disappointing to catastrophic. The Qixari tried the human method on a different desert world and somehow managed to flood their dig sites. The Threshold Collective's mathematical approach to shade networks resulted in structures that collapsed under their own geometric complexity. The Zenthari's second attempt ended when their adapted plant species immediately died, despite apparently perfect conditions. What are we doing wrong? Vrek asked during his third visit to New Flagstaff, this time arriving with a team of scientists and a significantly humbler attitude. Marcus Webb, now sporting a sunburn that should have been medically impossible given the settlement's shade networks, considered the question. You're thinking of the desert as an enemy to defeat. We think of it as a problem to solve. What's the difference? Enemies need to be conquered. Problems need to be understood. Webb gestured at the thriving settlement around them. We didn't fight Karak 7. We learned how it works and worked with it. Water's underground. We dig. Heat's extreme. We build shade and use thermal mass. Soil's mineral deficient. We amend it. Every challenge has a solution if you're patient enough to find it. But the time investment, one of the Zenthari scientists protested. The resources, surely there are easier worlds to colonize. Absolutely, Webb agreed cheerfully. Dozens of them. But those worlds don't need us. Desert worlds? We're pretty good at those. The first anniversary of landing arrived with celebration and more alien observers than New Flagstaff had residents. The settlement had transformed beyond recognition. Parks, actual parks with grass and trees, dotted the landscape under vast shade canopies. Agricultural zones produced enough food to sustain the population with surplus. Water features, purely decorative, burbled in central plazas. The temperature in inhabited zones held comfortable while outside, the desert still baked at 200 degrees under twin suns. Galactic media descended on New Flagstaff like curious scavengers, broadcasting footage of the impossible colony to billions of viewers. Humans walking through gardens where nothing should grow, children playing in parks where nothing should survive, aliens arriving to study techniques that shouldn't work. Marcus Webb gave an interview to the Galactic News Network, sitting in New Flagstaff's Central Park, under an earth oak tree that had absolutely no business being alive. Chief Engineer Webb, the interviewer began, a Qixari journalist whose species had failed spectacularly at their own desert colonization. How do you explain your success where so many other species have failed? Webb leaned back, considering, humans have been living in deserts for our entire existence as a species. The Sahara, the Gobi, the Atacama, the Australian outback, we've built civilizations in all of them. We've learned what works through thousands of years of trial, error, and stubbornness. This, he gestured at the settlement. This is just us doing what we've always done. But the technology is actually pretty basic, Webb interrupted. Wells and pumps, shade structures, soil amendment, drought-resistant plants. We brought some advanced materials from Earth, sure, but the principles are ancient. Humans figured out desert survival before we figured out written language. What would you say to the critics who claim Qixari 7 isn't truly habitable? Webb smiled. I'd invite them to visit, try the vegetables from our gardens, enjoy the parks, maybe have a drink of water. We have plenty. The interview went viral across multiple species networks. Within weeks, New Flagstaff had become a pilgrimage site for alien scientists, engineers and xenobiologists, trying to understand how humans had accomplished the impossible. The colony established an educational center, the first interspecies desert survival school in galactic history, teaching other species the ancient human art of making dry places livable. Human desert consultants became a suddenly lucrative profession. Colonies contacted Earth requesting specialists who could help them tackle their own inhospitable worlds. The techniques developed on Qixari 7 spread throughout the collective, adapted and modified for countless environments that had previously been written off as uninhabitable. The Zenthari Empire, swallowing considerable pride, contracted human engineers to reassess 17 previously abandoned desert colonies. 14 were deemed salvageable using human methods. The Threshold Collective, whose silicon-based biology made them theoretically ideal for hot environments, hired human advisors to teach them what their mathematical models had missed, that sometimes survival wasn't about perfect calculations, but about patient, practical problem-solving. Even the Qixari Confederacy, still somewhat embarrassed about their flooded dig sites, established a formal exchange program with Earth's desert research institutions. 2 years after landing, Qixari 7 hosted 1,500 human residents and 300 alien researchers, students and visitors. The settlement had expanded to cover 12 square kilometers, all shaded, all cooled, all irrigated from the aquifer systems humans had found where everyone else had found nothing. Agricultural operations produced surplus food that New Flagstaff exported to nearby systems. The gardens had grown to include Earth species from multiple desert biomes, creating a strange botanical mix of cacti, acacias, palms, and succulents that thrived under alien suns. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, now directing the Qixari 7 Arid Environment Research Institute, published a paper that sent shockwaves through galactic scientific circles on the habitability of desert worlds, a revised assessment. Her conclusion, backed by 2 years of data from New Flagstaff, suggested that approximately 30% of worlds classified as uninhabitable could actually support colonies using adapted human desert survival techniques. The Interstellar Collective quietly revised its colonization guidelines. Marcus Webb, interviewed again on the colony's 2nd anniversary, fielded a question that had apparently puzzled alien observers since the beginning: why do humans seem to enjoy desert environments? Webb considered this, standing in his office that overlooked New Flagstaff's Central Park, a park that shouldn't exist, filled with life that shouldn't survive, maintained by a species that apparently didn't understand the word impossible. There's something honest about deserts, he finally said. They don't pretend to be easy. They don't hide their challenges. Everything's visible, straightforward. The heat, the lack of water, the harsh conditions. It's all right there. No surprises. And when you solve those problems, when you make a desert bloom, he smiled, there's a satisfaction to that. We took something everyone said was impossible and made it work through patience, knowledge, and effort. That's very human. So you find it relaxing. In a weird way? Yeah. Back on Earth, we vacation in deserts. They're peaceful. The interviewer's translator made that strained electronic sound again. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had spent millennia avoiding desert worlds began reconsidering. Humanity's desert consulting industry boomed. Earth universities established programs in Zenthari environmental engineering. Human colonies sprouted on worlds previously deemed too hostile, each one proving that uninhabitable was really just another word for challenging. The interstellar collective's records, maintained for 14,000 cycles, required updating. The old truth that desert planets devoured everything needed revision. The new truth acknowledged that deserts would still devour the unprepared, the impatient, and those who fought against rather than working with the environment. But for one particular species, desert worlds represented not death traps but opportunities. Humans, it turned out, had spent so long making hostile places habitable that they'd actually gotten good at it. Karak 7 orbited its twin suns, no longer a monument to failed colonization, but a testament to stubborn human persistence. The desert still existed beyond New Flagstaff's borders, still harsh, still unforgiving. But now it had gardens growing in its shadow, wells drawing from its depths, and a civilization thriving in defiance of every logical expectation. They'd said the desert devoured life. The humans had shrugged, dug some wells, built some shade, and grown a garden. Not because it was easy, not because it was logical, but because apparently humans looked at impossible challenges and heard sounds interesting. Let's give it a shot. The galaxy was still processing this information, but one thing had become clear when humans arrived somewhere with shovels, seeds, and that peculiar optimistic stubbornness. You probably shouldn't bet against them, even if basic physics suggested you should. Especially if basic physics suggested you should. Because humans, it seemed, had never been particularly impressed by what basic physics suggested was impossible. They'd been ignoring such suggestions for thousands of years, and they weren't about to stop now. The desert devours life, the old wisdom said, but nobody had asked the desert how it felt about humans.